very much a numbers, a data guy. But I live and die by my Kestrel. I run the 5700 Elite with applied ballistics. It to me this is like the Bible of long range shooting. It teaches you everything, and you can get anything you need out of that thing. So what I'll do, for PRS, I'll have already gone in and put in all the stages in my Kestrel. I'll build the sectors out, and I have an episode and a video out, if you go back, of how to set up your Kestrel or your sectors in your Kestrel. Makes it super easy. But so I'll go to that stage and I'll start taking wind measurements, and I will have been doing this, all day or whatever, but say it's the first stage of the match, I'll start taking wind readings, and I'll get my Kestrel up. I'll get it start spinning, and I'll just hold it up for 30 to 60 seconds and get a good average. Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to Red, White, and Moose, the show dedicated to the relentless pursuit of excellence, whether it's behind a trigger, in a competition, or just in life. Everything we do demands precision, and I'm here to try and help you get there. My name is Mike. I am Moose. I guess, the head idiot running this this thing. Thank you for joining. I'm excited. I've had a great week to kind of recharge a little bit. We're just coming off of Thanksgiving, and I hope everyone had a lot of fun getting to hang out with their family. I definitely took a couple of days, and just kind of shut the phone off and disconnected a little bit. Spent some time with family, and it was very, very, very much needed. I will I will say that. But getting into it's just some fun couple of things before we get into the episode. Uh, the Aggies freaking blew it, and I'm so mad. I knew it was coming. And the thing that sucks is it was to Texas, and I knew going into it. It doesn't matter if Texas sucks or A&M sucks. It's just it's one of those rivalry games that you never know who's going to win, and oh, we freaking blew it. So it just hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully they'll still make it in the playoffs, not, just screw the rest of the season. But I still think Texas is going to blow it. That's my stance, and I'm gonna stick to it. But then on a more serious note, or like a more real note than freaking college football. So I did get a text from a guy this weekend, and they were at our match. So for those that don't know, we hosted the Dust Devil Duel NRL Hunter match here in Amarillo, Texas, earlier this year in April. It was the first. It was the first 2-day national match hosted in Amarillo. I was very excited to get to be a part of it, and we the match was awesome. It was a ton of fun. And then I can't remember if it was the first day or the second day, but I was out, just driving around and, checking on people and trying to meet people and make sure shooters, didn't need anything. And ran into this guy. He was, super, super kind. Just we started talking a little bit, and there was a guy shooting, running one of the stages while we were talking. He finished up, and he introduced him to me, and it was his younger brother. And his brother was just like smiling ear to ear. He was just cool, and he was like, "Yeah, man, this is my first match. I'm having so much fun." And it was cool, and it was really cool to see. And I looked, and I think he was shooting. Don't hold me to this. I think it was a Sig Cross with a. Man, I don't remember what scope it was on it, but it was a factory gun. It had a pretty decent scope on it from what I remember. But he was a hunter. It was his first match. He was there with his brother. And they were just cool. And so I knew we had a couple of prizes that sponsors had sent, that we kind of had some freedom to do what we wanted with. And then I knew the guys that were most likely going to win the match, and had already had conversations with some of them. Anyways, I knew there was going to be some opportunity to give away some stuff. By the time the match was over. Um, I took this guy's name down in my phone. Just they were just cool. They were respectful. They were having a good time. But anyways, long story short, fast forward to the end of the match. Austin Orgain won, and I've gone over this story a couple times, but Austin Orgain won, and with that, he won first walk on our prize table, which was a full custom rifle from our sponsors for the match, and it was a Lone Peak. Let's see, it was a Lone Peak Razor with a switch lug from West Texas Ordnance, with a barrel from CRB, chamber by West Texas Ordnance, and 25 Creedmoor. It had a Hawkins updraft brake and Hawkins rings with a Leupold Mark IV scope in a foundation Gideon. Let's see, with Hawkins bottom metal and a Trigger Tech diamond, and then the whole thing was Cerakoted in the Copperhead lurk pattern from Raven Rifles. I mean, like, it was sick. I mean, this rifle was absolutely decked out, completely finished up, and Austin won the match, so he got that rifle, or should have won that rifle. He gave away the rifle. I had told him about this young man. He had him come up, gifted him that rifle. It was super cool to get to watch. Getting his first custom rifle, first match, replacing the factory rifle. And so it was just really cool. So one, all of those sponsors sent in products or services to complete that rifle for someone at that match. And then the guy that won it not only gave it up, but that guy that won it also owns Custom Rifle Barrels, CRB, one of the sponsors that donated one of those parts and gave it to a young man. And so, anyways, I say all that to say, I got a text from his older brother today, or this weekend. He took that rifle out and got a buck with it, and sent me a picture of his brother holding the buck. I'll put the picture in here. But it was just so cool. And he said, "Hey, I just want to tell you that he got a buck. He used that rifle, and he gave all the credit to the gun and the experience that he gained from shooting NRL." And dude, that just made my freaking weekend. That was so cool. And that's what all of this, like, we talk about matches and shooting, and I love getting into all this technical stuff, but like, this is what it's all about. We put on a match for people to come out and shoot and have a good time and get better. And the sponsors came together and provided a cool thing to, provide something useful and of value to shooters. And then it ends up in the hands of a young man, and he goes out and makes memories and uses it in the field with the new rifle and the new skill set, and comes home with a trophy. And like, that's so freaking cool to be able to see everything come full circle like that, from the training to the sponsors to, the shooting to the success in the field. And like, that is so freaking cool. So a huge congrats to Peyton for getting that buck, putting in the work, coming to the match, and, getting your teeth kicked in and learning, and then applying it and getting that rifle and getting it all, set up and right, and then executing. And so it's cool, man. Huge congrats. And I don't know, man. Like, it gets me fired up to see that, and I played a, like, infinitely small role in this thing. It was just cool to get to see it and watch it all unfold. So I say that, like, this stuff is fun and it's cool, but like, it ends up like, this is the big picture, is like using it and putting it all together. So with the Dust Devil Duel match is coming up again for 2026 in April. It's gonna be bigger, better. It's gonna be awesome. And so, like, this is the kind of stuff that happens and then, unfolds, and then you can take in life and actually use. Like, it's cool to be able to talk about competitions and stuff, but then to be able to go and like use it and know what you're doing with it, that's cool. So if you do want to be a part of something like that, come to the Dust Devil Duel match. Registration opens here after the first of the year on the NRL website. Check it out. It's gonna be really, really fun. But I had to share that. It was such a cool story. But huge congrats to Peyton. That just, dude, like freaking, I'm so stoked. So before we get into the episode, I do want to give a a um a huge thank you to the sponsors that make this show happen: Alpha Munitions, Lone Peak, Collis Foundation, Hawkins Precision, West Texas Ordnance, Raven Rifles, and Botnia Solutions. I love you guys. I couldn't do it without you guys. This show is partnered with Collis. Collis is the world's oldest successful rifle scope manufacturer, so it's no surprise with that many years of experience, they've released their game-changing lineup. The K328i and the K540i truly are game changers. With a 40% wider field of view, they make a huge difference in competition and in the field. I love the DLR models with the easy to read elevation turrets, and they've got top tier glass that provides the ultimate color and clarity. When you're ready to be at the top of your game, you need a game-changing scope from Collis. Check out the K328 and K540i. Alpha Munitions sets the gold standard for rifle brass. Their OCD technology has been the first improvement for rifle brass in decades. I use it for hunting, competing. I use it in the business. Honestly, it's just the easy button for getting your ammo to shoot good. If you're looking to get the most out of your ammo or you want to lower your SDs, make sure you start out your ammo with a good foundation and use good quality brass. Find out why more top competitors are using Alpha Munitions brass in the PRS than any other brand. Next time you're getting your ammo started, make sure you start it out with Alpha Munitions brass. This episode is brought to you by West Texas Ordnance. West Texas Ordnance is a full-service custom rifle shop, and that full-service custom rifle shop is located on a 2,500-yard shooting range. It doesn't get any cooler than that. They cut all of my barrels for my hunting rifles, competition rifles, test barrels, and they are all absolute hammers. Check out their patented switch leg system for easy, repeatable barrel swaps, or the saw line of cartridges now including the 7 saw, 22 saw, and 25 saw. From their signature series of rifles all the way to their full custom rifles, they've got you covered. Next time you get a rifle going, check out West Texas Ordnance. This show is partnered with Hawkins Precision. Hawkins makes precision rifle hunting components built to help you go further and shoot farther. From lightweight hunting rings to heavy tactical rings to hunter bottom metals and flush magazines, they've got you covered. I run Hawkins on all of my rifles. I've got their ultralight rings, their heavy tack rings, the cantilever mount, one piece mount for PRS, their M5 bottom metal, hunter bottom metals. I absolutely love it. I run them on everything. Next time you're getting a rifle going, make sure you finish it out with Hawkins Precision. This show is partnered with Botnia Solutions. Botnia makes the most high-performing muzzle brakes on the market. They've got a low dust signature, so you're not getting the crap beat out of you when you're shooting prone. They've got upward-facing ports to help drive the rifle down when you're shooting positional and be able to see more through your scope. I love them. I've been running the MIDI on my hunting rifles and my NRL Hunter setup and couldn't be happier with it. And then when I need the most, I put the Maxi. I've got that on my PRS rifle. And when you need all of the recoil control that you can possibly get, look no further than Botnia Solutions. This episode is brought to you by Lone Peak Arms. Lone Peak makes absolutely amazing competition and hunting actions. Their Razor Infusion line is available in short and long action, left or right, and stainless or titanium. I've been running Lone Peaks for years, and I've run them in snowy, muddy, sandy conditions, and they just keep on ticking. Your action is the heart of your rifle, and make sure you're starting it off strong. Next rifle you get going, make sure you start it out with a Lone Peak action. This show is partnered with Raven Rifles. Raven Rifles produces artwork that shoots. Their custom Lurk Cerakote pattern provides depth and colors that honestly most patterns just dream of. Their limited release rifles are truly a work of art. They're available in limited numbers and guaranteed to be an eye catcher. I absolutely love the Lurk pattern. You can see the Snow Wolf and Copperhead patterns on the rifles behind me. They just truly become functional works of art. When you're looking to stand out above the rest, check out Raven Rifles. Okay, we're back now. So getting into the episode, I want to go over prepping for the shot, like the shot and then what happens if you miss. So like so many people think of the shot and what happens after as like a binary thing. You either hit or you miss. And rather than thinking and implementing a system of why for both of those things, it's not just a hit or miss type of thing. And so, depending on, and I want to, so I compete in PRS. I'm not a I am not top tier shooter, but I'm pretty good. And then I compete in NRL. I've podiumed quite a few matches there. And then I love to hunt, and so I want to kind of implement, kind of walk through these different scenarios. And if you're not a PR, if you're not a competitor, you can still apply this to, generic shooting, or at the range or training or anything like that. And so the big thing for me, and this is where you've got to, it's going to take reps and it's going to take practice and getting to know your system. But the pre-shot context and everything that you're analyzing and processing really is, I think, more important than the shot itself and what you're doing. And the main reason I say that is because it essentially sets you up for, in especially in the hunting scenario, whether you're going to take that shot or not, and or if it's in a competition scene, um what you're going to be able to evaluate after the shot and what information that's going to give you. And so, I want to start with PRS because it's a little more technical, but it applies to all shooting, whether you're going to be in PRS, or there's some caveats, but PRS, NRL, or just general range shooting. But especially in PRS, so for those that don't know, so when you go to a PRS match, you're going to have X amount of stages that you're going to shoot each day. Your squad's going to get to the stage, get set up, and you're going to have a match book, or you'll already know what's going on for that stage, and it's going to tell you that you're going to shoot 10 rounds at these 5 targets, and I'm making up a scenario. Distances are A, B, C, D, E, and these are your positions, and you have this much time. So then you get to work. And generally, the first thing I always do is I go pick a spot. I'm going to set up my tripod and ditch all my gear. So the absolute best place to do that is right behind where the guy's going to be shooting. Now, if it's like a multi-position stage where there's a lot of movement, you can't, obviously you're not going to get up and move with each shot, but um if it's one, like, especially if they're prone and like shooting a troop line, or one position, set up directly behind them. And the reason you do that is when you set up directly behind them and you're glassing to the target, that bullet path is going to go right up into your glass into the target, and that angle is going to be correct. And so if you set up 2 or 3 feet, and it can be as small, I mean, like a foot one way or the other, it's not like it's going to be, oh my god, dramatic different, but it is going to be enough to where if it hits certain areas, you may not be able to know exactly where it went because of the angle. If you may think it hit right, but it actually went behind the target and you didn't see it, and then you see the splash on the right. So I like to set up directly behind them to the best of my ability. Now, this, it's depending on the match, you can have 10 to 15 person squads, and then you end up having, a forest of tripod legs to try and, set up around. Not always not always the easiest thing to do, but if you can do that. Now, one thing I do like to do, if there are multiple positions, or say you have a big pan of a target array or something like that, where it's not just one angle that you're glassing to. So if it's multiple shooting angles, I still like to set up directly behind the shooter, because then as they pan, you pan with them. But if that's, for whatever reason that's not the case, I like to set up either on the harder target or the harder position, or combination of the two. Um, and that, quote unquote harder target or position is what you're evaluating. So, it could be that position looks tricky, or there's a weird valley, or there's some trees, out in the field that you can't tell if the wind is doing something weird, or so whatever that makes sense to you is kind of how I like to set up. And then you can you can watch that trace, over and over and over as shooters go through. Now, there's a few different, uh, I guess, next steps, or routes that you can go. None are necessarily more right than the other. I think there's, kind of depends on how your brain works, and what your eyes pick up good, or pick up better. gooder. God, I'm still freaking Thanksgiving turkey brain. So there are a lot of guys. So like some of my friends that I shoot with are quite a bit better at this than me. But say you've got a target and you measure it, and so this is getting into a lot of the steps, but have something to be able to measure your target, whether it's a reticle in your spotting scope, you getting down on your gun and milling it, whatever the case is, but have a way to measure the width of the target. And so, say you get on and it's half a mil wide, that, and then you set up to glass, and you can watch the arc of the bullet as it comes out of the rifle and heads to the target, and has that bend from the wind hold that the shooter starts with, and then the wind, overcoming it and starting to push that bullet back into the target. And so uh sometimes, and if you've done it enough, I can do it, but I'm not great at it. But you can essentially measure how much that bullet bends in that trace. So you can tell, it arced half the target width, or the whole target width, or two target widths. And so a fairly realistic scenario that, for a PRS match, especially if it's on the East Coast, or somewhere that doesn't have a lot of wind. Say you're 400 or 500 yards out, and it's a 5 or 6 tenth wide target. They shoot. You see that trace come to the left edge of that target, and then it gets pushed back in and hits center of that target. So roughly they probably held 2.5 to 3 tenths, because that trace comes to the edge of that target, and we because we already measured it, we know it's 5 or 6, we'll say 6 tenths for this scenario. We know it's 6 tenths wide. That trace kisses the edge of that target. Well, half of 6 is 3. So that roughly their win call was 3 tenths. Now, and same thing, if you see it arc off the target, about half a target, then they probably held about a full target, or 6 tenths, and so you can kind of play with some things like that. There are guys that are really good at that, and that tells them all the information. They can process things that way. Sometimes I can get some information out of it, but that's not necessarily the way my brain really likes to process things. I'm very much a numbers, a data guy. So I live and die by my Kestrel. There's this is I run the 5700 Elite, with applied ballistics. It to me, this is like the Bible of long range shooting. It teaches you everything, and you can get anything you need out of that thing. So what I'll do, for PRS, I'll have already gone in and put in all the stages in my Kestrel. I'll build the sectors out, and I have an episode and a video out, if you go back, of how to set up your Kestrel, or your sectors in your Kestrel. Makes it super easy. But so I'll go to that stage, and I'll start taking wind measurements, and I will have been doing this, all day or whatever. But say it's the first stage of the match, I'll start taking wind readings, and I'll get my Kestrel up. I'll get it start spinning, and I'll just hold it up for 30 to 60 seconds and get a good average. And I can usually do this. I'll do this while guys are, the rest of the squad's getting their gear set up and tripods, and we're bullshitting, catching up and all that fun stuff. So that will give me just a generic, okay, what is it doing in general? And so we'll take Amarillo for an example, so it's not super boring, and let's say it's a, a 10 to 15 mile an hour. Oop. I need to get, I have this hatchet, this Winkler. I like it, and I want to have it displayed, but it fell over. I need to figure out something to I want like a little display thing to hold it, but not permanent, because I still use it. But anyways, so let's say it's 10 to 15 miles an hour, and we're gonna say a full value wind, just for simplicity's sake. So then I'll go in and start looking at what my Kestrel is telling me. And so I have one of my guns in here that it's my 308 tack setup that I was running, but it's the wind is essentially identical to it, like a dasher. So we'll work off of that. And if we do it at a 10 to 15 mile an hour wind, and we'll say it's at like 700 yards. And I'm just leaving for the last environmentals that were in here. So that gives us 1.13 to 1.72 mil hold. Okay. So that's what is that? That's 0.59 tenths. So that gives us, yeah. So 0.59 tenths of wind variance from the 10 to 15 mile an hour wind at that distance. So now we have that information. We have previously already measured that target. So for this scenario, let's say we measured it and said it was 5 tenths, which is pretty average for PRS. So now we've got a 5/10 wide target and a 6/10 wide variance. So now we got to figure out what the hell we're going to do because the wind variance is bigger than the target. So that, 30 to 60-second wind reading that's just going to kind of give me a general reading of what's going on. So then, I'll start analyzing, taking a look of like, okay, what does the terrain look like? Are there hills? Are there valleys? Are there tree lines? Is there something breaking it up? And start putting stuff together. Out here in West Texas, it's pretty damn flat, and 99% of the time, I don't have to worry about that. It's just flat and windy. But if you've got other things, wind can compress, and you can think of it the easiest, and it's said all the time, but the easiest way to think about it is if you think of water like or wind like water. And so if you kind of look out over, the terrain that you're and think of if someone just took a big cup of water from up top and slowly poured it, down, how would that flow through this? Is it flat? Is it just going to run? If there's valleys and stuff, that you can see how it starts to manipulate. And so you can get an idea, is it doing anything weird? What angle is it coming from? Is it actually 10 miles an hour? Is it actually 15? And where I'm standing is, am I blocked or sheltered from something? Is it actually 20 miles an hour? And then you can start getting a game plan together. So now we start analyzing all this stuff. And so we're gonna say I think it's averaging 14 miles an hour, and it just happens to lull every now and then to 10 miles an hour. And so really our bracket's going to be like 13 to 15. That's kind of where it's hanging out at. Um and so if we adjust it to that actually so that way closes down our wind gap to it brings up a 1.48 to 1.72 mil hold. So that gives us 0.24 to a 0.24 mil wind variance. And so we've essentially cut it in half, and now everything on our wind bracket is within that target. And so then we can send that shot, see where it hits, make an adjustment, and go from there. And so that's the way I really like to start, evaluating pre-shot for like a PRS or just a general target shot that I'm going to have to take. And so starting to use um, numbers and math and probability in your favor is how you start to create more opportunity for success in these shot scenarios. And so you can start, and this is where I like to, I just kind of sit down. Like if I'm, getting ready or, like the night before the match, or if I'm bored watching TV or something like that, I'll just get my Kestrel out and you can start kind of messing around with different scenarios, and you can create like if it's a 6 to 9 mile an hour and it's a headwind, what does that look like? And if I make it a full value wind, what does that look like? And how where can I start, and at what distances do these how big does this variance get? And so you can kind of start figuring things out of what makes sense and some things like that. Now that's all well and good for PRS, for when you're at the range, some things like that where you are in control of all of the variables. You know what's going on, you know where the targets are at, you know the range, da 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 da. Now, okay, so actually before we move on to that next step, I have to make a caveat that I didn't say. This is assuming that all of your ballistics are lined out correctly. In PRS, and especially when you are, when you get into high level competition, we are assuming that your ammo is shooting, you have good high quality ammo that has good accuracy, good consistency, and that you have your all of this data inputted into your Kestrel and that you've run it out to distance and trued everything out. Because at the end of the day, when a miss happens, we want to know that essentially 90% of the time it's going to be from wind, or the other 10 or small percent is like we did it. We know that it's, we broke a bad shot, or made a mental error, whatever the case is. Um, but we have to know that it's that elevation wise, it is in track to hit that target. Because if you also insert that into a variable, you're going to be chasing your tail all over the place. Is it just your cone of fire? Is it your standard deviation of your velocity causing you to hit? It's just it becomes a nightmare. So that is a caveat I have to make. That's assuming that we have our ballistics trued out and that it is shooting good. So now moving out of that to this is going to be the more NRL hunter scenario, or getting into the hunting situation where we don't necessarily know where the target is or how far it's going to be. And so then that's going to open up. We don't know how far it is, what the wind angle is going to be. We know what the wind speed is because we're experiencing it, but is it different where we're going to be shooting or something like that? So in the NRL hunter scenario, there's going to be someone, we're assuming, middle of the match, there's going to be someone in your squad shooting. You're going to be waiting, taking your turn, getting all your stuff together. Unlike PRS, you don't know where the targets are. You can't be in glass. You can't watch the mirage. You can't see where other guys are shooting. It's all blind. So that creates a different set of problems that you've got to work through. So generally the way I like to approach that, so don't one, good matches are set up where you can't see anything. Two, don't cheat, like don't be a scumbag. But there's things that you can take, information that you can take while other people are shooting if you pay attention. The easiest thing is the sound of a target ding. You're waiting in line, you're gonna hear, ba-ding, 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 all over the dang place. But from that stage, you'll know, okay, oh, they're shooting, straight out in front of us, or it's out over here, whatever. And it's not going to be pinpoint accurate, but it can give you a general idea. And then two is the sound or the time from the shot to the impact sound. And so, pro tip, I'm going to say 90 to 95% of people that compete in NRL Hunters shoot a 6.5 Creedmoor with a 140 to 147 grain bullet. So damn near everybody's time of flight is the exact same. And most of them are running, 22 to 24 inch barrels, somewhere in there. So like pretty much everyone's running, very close to the same bullet, very close to the same speed. With that being said, you can get pretty familiar pretty quick of like what the time delay sounds like for a 300-yard shot, a 500-yard shot, an 800-yard shot, 1,000-yard shot. And you can start to tell, if it's boom, ding, that sucker's going to be close. It may be, 200 yards, but if it's boom, ding, that sucker's out there. It's going to be, it's going to be out there. So you can start processing, angle and distance from the sounds. And then you've got that kind of going into it. And then while you're waiting, get a wind reading. And same thing, I like to try and get, an average. And so this is a tip. If you don't know this is on your Kestrel, this is a huge shortcut. I use it literally every time I get my Kestrel out. If you double tap the light button, it'll switch to weather mode. So there's 3 modes on your Kestrel. There's ballistics, weather, and easy mode. Easy mode, to be honest, I don't even know what it is. I don't really use it. It's just a simplified version of it. Weather mode is great. I use it for the wind. So if you double tap that, you can scroll up and down and it'll have like wind and dew point and a bunch of other things. But you get to the wind and then you can scroll left and right and it'll have wind speed, crosswind, da da da. but there's one that has an instant win reading, and then there's one that will build an average win reading, and it'll give you min, max, and average. You can get that average, and then when you're done, you just double click the light button. It'll go back to ballistics mode to your home screen, and it makes it really easy to switch back and forth and get quick win readings. But so I'll, get your, hold your kestrel up, get your win reading, you kind of get an idea. And then generally I like to do is, um, you know, because generally you're not where you're standing currently is not going to be where you're shooting from. And so your perspective of what you're looking at is going to change. And so for a wind direction, I'll try to find, I'll figure out where it's coming from, and then I'll look out onto the horizon and I'll pick something that gives me an origin point for where I'm looking at. It could be a cell tower, a building, a tree, a bush, a rock, whatever it is, so that when I get up on the stage, I know, hey, that reference point, that's where the wind's coming from. So then, uh, I like to, and uh, knowing my gun number for that setup is very helpful. When you're coming up with stuff on the fly in situations like NRL Hunter or just real hunting, and so I encourage people to kind of figure that out. It's essentially, and this is another perk to using mills over MOA. But you can figure out your gun number, and essentially what it equates to is, like, if you have a 6 mile an hour gun and you have a 6 mile an hour wind, your wind hold is 2/10 at 200, 3/10 at 300, 4/10 at 400, and so on and so forth. And so the bigger your gun number, the more efficient it is in the wind. To achieve the same 4/10 hold at 400 yards, a bigger gun number, like a 10 mile an hour gun, it's going to take a 10 miles an hour to need that wind hold versus a 6 mile an hour for a 6 mile an hour gun. And so knowing your gun number in conjunction with what the wind speed is doing, and then like a rough idea of kind of, what you've been hearing, you can kind of get an idea of what you're going into. So then you get up, you glass, you find the target, you range, you get a distance. And okay, so we're gonna say it's 500 yards. So then you get on the gun. The first thing that is going to help in NRL is when you get behind the gun, measuring how freaking wide that target is. You've got a measuring system in your scope, use it. So, I mean, you've got to aim at the target anyways. It's literally going to be on there. It takes, 2 seconds to see where this hash to this hash, and then you know how wide it is. And so in an NRL, we can have a very wide variety of widths of targets based on the scenario that, or the animal stage that you're hunting. So you could have something like a prairie dog, that a standing prairie dog that is very narrow and gives you very little margin for error. So say it's like a 2/10 wide target. Well, it doesn't give you a whole lot of variance. And you essentially you've just got to be pretty Johnny on the spot with your win call. But let's go to a little bit more realistic scenario. Let's say it's like a raccoon or a pig or something, like something that's a little more horizontal shaped. And an average target width, is probably 6, 7 tenths, something like that, somewhere in there. So say you get on and you put your crosshair on its nose, and you see that its butt is at 7/10. So that sucker is 7/10 wide, and you've got a 10 mile an hour wind, and you're shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor with a 140, and I'm making all this stuff up as so. But say 500 yards, that setup is roughly like a 7 mile an hour setup. At 500 yards, we're going to assume a full value wind for simplicity's sake. That's going to, at 500 yards with a 10 mile an hour wind, that's going to give us about a 7.5 tenth wind hold, somewhere right in there. So, and say it's, it's gusting, varying up and down a couple of miles an hour. So then you get on that target, and say you put 7/10 on the target. Well, because it's 7/10 wide, we've got 3.5 tenths of variance either way from that particular hold. So now is where you can start playing logics and probability and start figuring out what makes the most sense. Does holding 7/10 right in the middle of that thing and sending the shot make the most sense? Is the wind not really doing anything weird? It's not going up and down a lot. There's not big gusts or lulls or weird angles that it's coming in and out of. If it makes sense, it makes sense, and you can send that shot. Well, say all of a sudden, maybe that's not the case, and you've got to start narrowing down what you think it is. Okay, so now we take our scenario where it's been 8 to 12 but averaging 10. Let's say it's 8 to 14. Okay, well now it doesn't fit. Our variance doesn't fit on inside the width of that target. Okay, well now we can start analyzing a little bit in our head, like, okay, is it actually truly varying from 8 to 14 constantly? Is it just just up and down? Do I have to have all that wind hold? More than likely, no. More than likely it's going to end up hovering around somewhere, and then it's going to have peaks and big peaks and low lulls. And so we need to figure out, where is it hanging out at? So is it, let's say it's hanging out around like 11 miles an hour, and it is gusting to 14, and it is going down to 8, but it's really kind of hanging out around there. Well, then you've essentially bought yourself a narrower margin of error by eliminating what is not happening 90% of the time on the edges, and bringing that in around a certain focal point to get it onto target. So that's how I like to kind of analyze, the pre-shot. And then, you know, i- if you hit the target and you see your impact on the target, then you can measure from the center of the target to that impact point, make the correction, and continue on with the stage. So moving into, now taking all of those same principles and moving it into a hunting scenario, it's essentially I essentially process it the exact same way that I do with an NRL hunter scenario. So I'm gonna take this aoudad hunt that I just went on as an example, because I got the aoudad, I shot him at, it was about 400 yards, and then I had a whitetail in the scope at longer distances, and ended up not taking the shot. And so again, you know, got if and this is, you're gonna have to, paint a little bit of a picture in your head, like what does this look like to you? But say you're out there, get have your kestrel on you, be taking wind readings, just throughout the day. Um, First thing when I get there, I like to get it out and take a measurement so I know what's going on. If I start feeling big gusts, I'll get it out, like, hey, what are those gusts getting up to? So if it happens, I know what it feels like, and I can take measurements. And if it's gusting like that, it's generally gonna be dipping down some, so you can get, what the lulls and everything are gonna be. And you can have that in the back of your mind of, this is what the wind is doing. This is what my gun number is. This is the distance. So like for the shot I didn't take, I got down on this whitetail, and he was at like 720 yards, and the wind was crazy consistent. It was essentially like 2.5 to 3.5 miles an hour, very, very consistent. We were up on this point, and it was just going out into this big pasture. There was no weird wind things. But he was moving, he was walking, and at that distance, I didn't feel good with him walking, because I didn't know. I knew I was comfortable with the gun and the cartridge and the ballistics that I had with that, but I definitely wasn't familiar with it in the sense of time of flight and like walking stuff at those distances. So I definitely wanted to make sure he was stopped if I was going to take the shot. He never he was just casually walking the whole time. And then but while he was doing that, I was measuring the target area on the deer, from his front shouldered back, of how wide that was, so that I knew, this is the forgiveness that I had. This is what I estimated my wind hold was going to be. And if I'm wrong, a tenth or one way or the other, where is it going to land? And so I was building confidence in myself as he, getting able to watch him walk as this was going on. Well, then he started to turn, and he was completely facing away from me. We're watching. Well, then he starts walking away, and he's at an angle, and same thing. I started measuring, but he's hard quartering away. I mean, like, I wasn't going to take the shot, but I was measuring, and I mean, there was essentially like no room for error. I mean, if I was off just a little bit, it was either going to hit him in the ass or hit him in the head, and it wasn't good. So I was watching and watching, and he just kept going, and he got out to like 950 or something, and I call him, I was like, this is stupid, like, this isn't going to work anymore. So that's how, like, the information I'm trying to work through, and this is the, like, the pre-stage, setup that, is going on earlier in the day. And then as I'm getting down on the gun, you know, dialing my elevation, I already know what the wind is doing. And then as I'm getting into the shot, prepping, measuring, running those calculations, and in that scenario, the risks did outweighed the reward by quite a bit, and so we ended up not taking that shot. And then later on that day, uh, got to take a shot on an audad, and it worked out great. So he came in at like 650. Watched him come in to like 475, and then ended up. I think the shot was around 400. I went over it last week, but you start being able to play these numbers in your head and some things like that, and it starts making things a lot easier, and you know where you can be, and what you can do. So that's my thought process, and what I do to kind of prep for getting ready for a shot or getting ready for a stage. Now, um, the that is a big, I guess, undertaking. Starting to figure out where that sits, and how to manipulate all of that data. But where, I guess, how do I say this? Once you start getting more familiar with this, and you start getting more reps, and you start getting, building that skill set, um, figuring out why you missed, is a very good skill set to have, but a very hard one to build. It just takes a lot of reps. Um, so the easiest step that I can tell people, to help start evaluating misses, is keeping your face on the gun. The average guy, that is the first thing they do. They shoot, and they rip that head off the scope, like, like the deer is at 80 yards, and they're gonna watch that sucker just run away. Well, bro, I'll tell you, you've got a magnified optic 2 inches in front of your face. Just look through that thing, and you'll be able to see it a lot better. Keep your head on the gun. And what a lot of guys, and so and I know that's what it's coming from, is the classic hunting. You shoot, and you look up, and you want to see where it went, because I get it, most shooters don't see what happens through the scope, due to, excessive recoil or poor recoil management. Um, and so they're looking up to see where it's going. Well, if you can control that rifle system and stay in the gun, and then, so one, if you're not looking through the scope, you're not going to see shit. Two, once you figure out how to stay in the scope, and then, like, guys, they'll pull their head up to be able to run the bolt. You can run the bolt with your head on the gun, no problem. Just practice it. Um, but once you keep your head in the gun, and you're able to start seeing where your misses are, and or hits, that becomes a skill set in and of itself. But there's a handful of reasons of, like, why you might have missed. Number one thing, check your zero. Check your zero. I can't tell you how many hunts or shoots or whatever I've been to, and it's gotten ruined because a gun wasn't zeroed, or they just didn't want to check it. Check it. It's If you show up to a match, check your zero. If you're going to a hunt, check your zero, or zero right before you go. Like, but and this is the problem, is depending on what your travel for the hunt is, your shit's gonna get bumped around, so you may end up having to check it again. I mean, I just recommend checking everything once you get there. You just need to do it. But check your zero. Um, then flinching, and this is where I hammer on, like, rifle weight and setups and systems, is the recoil can make or break a shot. It it can make or break the shot with, like, the system and how you're anticipating the system, and we've all heard of, like, anticipating the recoil, and you start tensing up, and you start, like, your shoulders will start digging into it, or your handles start squeezing harder, or you'll yank the trigger. There's a bunch of different things to it, and so this is one of a big part of why I like to encourage, you don't have to have that big freaking bruiser rifle and have it weigh 7 pounds. There's trade-offs to everything, and so a slightly heavier rifle and or a smaller cartridge is going to recoil less, and you're going to be able to control that rifle subconsciously better and have a more enjoyable shooting experience, and then being able to gather more information throughout the shot and after the shot. Having bad recoil anticipation, it's just that's just a time behind the gun thing. It's a combination of either your experience or your setup or both, and you can either be very experienced and anticipating it because of heavy recoil, or you can be inexperienced and slapping the trigger, or you can be inexperienced and slap the shit out of the trigger because you're anticipating the recoil. So there's two avenues to tackle there. One is you, and two is the system. And so the with you, it's just practice and it's just reps. You can, well, I like to, and it depends on what your personality is. Some people like to practice, some people like to, like, they don't want to practice. Um find a way that makes it fun for you. Whether you could just go to the range by yourself and just shoot a little bit, and but pick something that you're going to work on and start practicing it. You could get a group of friends and go to the range. You could go compete. You could come to a PRS match, an NRL hunter match. You can dive deep onto it, and be surrounded by people that know this stuff very well. There's a lot of things that you can do to start, but just get some reps. But in dry fire is can be a huge help. If you get behind the gun, with nothing in it, and you pull the trigger and you see that whole reticle, shake, you need to work on some stuff. Um, then on the flip side of that is the system. So, and this is I'm there's a million different options. This one is going to be up to you and what you like and what your preferences are. But the easiest one is most people can probably take a step down in cartridge size from what they're shooting. If if the big cartridges and these intermediate size cartridges, I love them. They're a ton of fun to shoot. They are fun to hunt with, and they definitely have their places. Um, but you don't have to take a sheep rifle to the blind in Texas that you're going to shoot stuff at 80 yards with. So that's what I'm getting at. And so maybe there's a lot of other cartridges that are great for hunting. The 7 saw I have become such a huge fan of. It's SAW, not SOM, from West Texas Ordnance. I shoot in PRS, I shoot in NRL, I hunt with it. I've got multiple different setups with it. I in my opinion, I think it is the best short action standard bolt face cartridge on the market. It's just too easy. Recoil is very similar to like a 6.5 Creedmoor, but you're going to get better ballistics and energy on target. But something like the Saw or a 6.5 Creedmoor, and now I will say this, um, 6.5 Creedmoor, things like that, they are not heavy recoiling cartridges, but there is a reason that, like, if you take a look at these high level PRS competitors, they are using cartridges pretty much. Well, I'm gonna say 95% of everything that people are shooting is smaller than a 6.5 Creedmoor. And on top of that, they're shooting guns that weigh 2, 3, 4 times as much as a hunting rifle. That is because they're trying to control recoil and see every bit of it, gather every bit of information that they can. Now you go into a rifle that is, half, a third, a quarter of the weight of these PRS rifles, and you're trying to, control the same recoil, that becomes, and especially from, a non-competitor standpoint that hasn't, sent thousands and thousands of rounds downrange, that becomes the thing that you've got to control and account for. And so where, some of these things that I like, 6 Creedmoor, like, 25 Creedmoor, some of these smaller cartridges, they're very effective if you are proficient with your system and your rifle and you can put the bullet where it needs to be. Now, that is the downside. That is the trade-off, is you have to put the bullet where it needs to be. These big honking bruisers will give, just dump so much energy, and there's a lot more surface area to going through. I mean, I get it. There's trade-offs and you have to take that into account. But, something like a six Creedmoor with like a 105 to 108, that is a pretty slick hunting cartridge. Like I just took a doe a few weeks ago with the six PRC is a 109 going 3200, and it just anchored that deer to the ground. So that's where I like, you got to work from, the dude pulling the trigger to the system that he's working with. And these two things can end up working together really well. And then whether you're shooting breaks or cans, that's going to make a big difference. Breaks are definitely going to, cut the recoil down more. There's cons to it because they're loud. Whereas with suppressors, you are going to get a recoil reduction, not as much as a good quality break. But you're gonna have protection for your ears. And I do think there's something to disturbing other animals in the area, some things like that. Um, but like so this 25/7 PRC that's up here, I shot this in at the Cactus Classic NRL match back in March, and I ran the Botnia MIDI on it, and I could see absolutely everything, and it was great. Like I that's why I partner with Botnia. Like I think these breaks are unreal good. Now, when I took it hunting, I like to hunt suppressed. So I put and this isn't a knock on the suppressors, it's just the nature of how suppressors work. Um I took the shot at 400 yards. I saw the animal fall in the scope, but because the gun just vibrated enough and that cartridge is significantly faster than most hunting cartridges, it got there very quickly and in just that shimmy. So I saw it fall, but I didn't see exactly where I hit on him. So, these systems all kind of um, fall into place. Now, in a hunting scenario, if you miss, and this is where okay, hold on, I'll back up. We'll start with PRS because we'll keep the same system flowing through. So if you miss, what's the next steps? There's got to be, all right, A, B, C, D. You start working through. Now the biggest thing, did you see the miss? Because if you didn't see the miss, we've got a whole nother set of problems we got to figure out. But let's say we saw the miss. That is best case scenario, and that is easiest case scenario. You put your say you put your aiming points back where you were aiming. So say you held half a mil, you put half a mil back at the center of the target, and you look and see where that miss impacted the ground, and say that's at the 1 mil mark. Well, then you move the 1 mil mark over to the center of the target, and you've now made that correction. You measured exactly how far off you were from it, and you've moved it that much and put that into the center of the target. That's pretty simple. That's fairly self-explanatory. There now, doing it is a lot easier said than done. But if you can see it, that is the case. You measure, move it over, and that's it. And now a lot of guys, and this is where reps and experience take a big part in this. But you see, and I have a memory from this of this that stands out like it was yesterday. my first match that I ever shot was at Clay's match back in, I think it was 20, I can't remember, 20, I think it's 2021. And I think it was like the third or fourth stage of the day. But for those that have shot that match, it's the KYL stage. I sent my first shot. I was like a mil and a half off the left, and I came in a 10th. Shot, saw it, came in a 10th. And you just keep kind of inching in and inching in, and you never get to the target. And that's what happened to me. I kept inching in, shot after shot after shot. And by the 10th shot, I was damn near there. But in my mind, it's like, oh, I just need to add some wind. And so I added some wind and shot. And then I saw it wasn't enough, and I just added some wind. And so, but if I would have just sent that first shot, measured that I was like a mil and a half off, brought it all the way back in, then I would have been, I would have had one, miss for the stage and been able to correct and move on. And so use the ruler that's in your scope. It's there for a reason. So now let's say, okay, well, let's, before we get into not seeing it, there's a few other things that it could be. So let's figure out why. So was your number one thing, most likely your win call was bad, and that's the scenario that I was going through. So most likely that's going to be what we guessed. So, but let's say that's not the case. And I'll give an example. I see this quite a bit of guys coming off of a stage and be like, dude, I don't understand, man. Like everybody else was having to hold like 5 or 6 tenths, man. And dude, I was holding like a mil, like 1-1. I just got wind dicked, man. This is bullshit. I hate this sport. That doesn't happen. Like that very rarely ever happens in reality. It can. I've seen it a few times. But more than likely, when you hear someone saying that they were canted, their rifle was canted and they didn't know it. So that is a big thing. Checking your rifle cant before your shot is huge when you start getting into distance shooting. And it's something you've got to have a level on your rifle, in my opinion. A bubble level at a minimum. That's generally what I run on like all of my hunting setups. For my PRS setup, I run the digital, the MDT send it level, because for that setup, it is much faster, much easier, much quicker. But you've got to have a level. A couple of degrees of cant at 1,000 yards is like 20 inches of error. It's substantial. So like, that is something, and that's a couple degrees. Most people, I mean, our eyes are pretty good at getting things level, but where you start running into issues, and this is where I think it's paramount, is if you shoot in terrain that's not flat, you've got to have a level, because your mind will want to level the reticle to the terrain or what you think is level, and it will screw you up. And I've seen guys do it. I've done it. But you need to have a level. And that needs to be part of your pre-shot routine. It is that final step is checking that level. But that's when that is the one when I hear guys say that, like, oh, I just had to do so much more. That's when I know that's generally their rifle was candid and they just didn't know it. And here's something else too, especially for guys that are like, mid pack, or like you're really starting to like get your processes in check, but like it's not quite there. And this is something I did quite a few times, and I've had conversations with guys at matches and watched this happen. So they'll come off and say, "Oh, well, I was holding, twice as much as everybody else." Like, well, dude, did you check your level? Yeah, dude, I checked it and it was good. I don't know what the hell happened. What a lot of guys will do is they'll get up, they'll check their level for their first shot. Good. They'll move on to the next target, and then they'll never check their level again. It's gotta be an every shot thing. So that's, in my mind, that's a big thing that people miss. And then and obviously there's a million things where like we're not going to go into every single reason why you'd miss, trying to cover the big ones. But then the next big one is just a bad position. You weren't you were wobbling, your rifle wasn't steady, whatever the case is. And that again is reps. And I talked about it a few weeks, but like I use Weebad shooting bags for everything. I really like them. I use the heavy ones for positional stuff and these light ones for hunting and for rear bags. But getting a shooting bag and then going to like you can just put it on a rock or like I can't tell you how many times I've dry fired in like hotels or at my house and like I'll throw this over like the back of a couch or a kitchen like a dining room chair or something like that and just dry fire. And in PRS and NRL and these like dynamic shooting styles, the position the only thing positional shooting is being able to build a position at any height. And so whether it's, it's standing, it's high kneeling, low kneeling, prone, or anything in between, it's being able to get to get your skeletal system and structure in sync with your rifle system at any height. That's really the only difference, and it just it looks different, and they achieve those things different ways. But it's just figuring out how to do it at different heights. And so dry fire, and being able to build a good position. And I'll give this is the probably the number one tip I can give people when we went to the Caprock Rifle Club one day NRL match like a month ago or so. I was helping some of the Texas Tech precision rifle guys, which by the way, I think this is super cool. If you're local to like West Texas, Texas Tech, I guess I met the guys and I want to talk with them more, but Texas Tech now has like a precision rifle club. I met them. Let's see, I think it was early this year at the Caprock 2-day match. They came and helped. One of the guys RO'd with me, super cool. And then they came out to the 1-day and shot it, and I was talking with them. And the gist from what I understand is it's if you're at Tech and and want to get more into precision rifle and competing and hunting, and then they are doing. I believe there is a Christianity aspect to the club. I believe they're it's teaching rifle safety and education and growing in your walk with God. It seems pretty cool. Take a look at it. I know they have. I believe they just set up an Instagram page. If I can, I'll try and go remember and go back. And if I remember, I'll put it up here. But check it out. I think that's kind of cool. I had never really seen something like that. So if you know of any other schools that have something like that, let me know. I think that's super cool. I want to know about them. We may see if we can figure out something to get involved as these things grow. But anyways, check that out if you're around Lubbock or at Tech. But I was kind of coaching these guys, anyways, and one of the number one thing I see when guys get down on a knee, and if you've never been in the in shooting, it makes sense. But you drop down to a knee, and your dominant knee goes down. And that's just kind of what people are used to. But in reality, it's the opposite for precision rifles. So like I'm left-handed, and I get my my left hand on the grip and on the trigger. Well, then I want to get my left knee up because then I have something for my elbow to rest on, and I can get bone on, essentially bone on bone contact instead of having my elbow floating around in space and not having anything for this to rest on. And when I get my knee up, I've got something to set it on, and I don't have to wobble. It's there. So, and I corrected that on all those guys, and it's just a natural thing. But that is something when you're starting to learn these positional shooting, keep that dominant knee up because that's going to give you something for you to rest on, and it will instantly tighten up your wobble zone a lot. Um. So, um then okay, so those are the main three things, like, or the main things I see, like, if guys are missing. But then what do you do if you don't miss? or if you don't see it. And this definitely, more applies to the competition side of things. You've got to be evaluating the target and the setup. Honestly, well before you get up on the clock, if you have the opportunity to. Generally, what it's going to come down to is it's going to be something with the terrain, or it's going to be something with lighting. So, if there's really tall vegetation or grass and it's just eating that, those impacts up, you're not gonna it's gonna be really hard to see versus if it just hits dirt and you see the puff. Um, and some like one little tip I'll give with that, if you're somewhere and the grass is really tall, like if it's 3 or 4 feet tall, um, keep this in mind because you'll see it happen. If someone hits, we'll say someone hits right, okay, there will inevitably be someone that says, "Hey, you hit high right." And because what's happening is they hit directly right of the target, the bullet hits the base of that grass and then shakes the tip of it that's 3 or 4 feet tall. And so now it gives an appearance that they have missed right. And then they see movement 4 feet high and they think they're high when that's actually not the case. So that's something and again, where we have to be able to trust our elevation and our data that we're sending out there. But that's something to keep in mind if you're seeing something, with tall grass, or like I said, something with lighting. There's going to be like a weird shadow. Um, you know, uh, people are like, digging a hole on one side of the target, and it just the sun's on this side and it just hits it. There's something like that, or if you hold strong on wind, it can get blown back behind the target, and then you just won't see anything, and that can be hard. Um, uh, or if you're skylined, if it's a skyline target, and you miss, there's literally nothing for it to hit. So, in situations like that, you've really got to sit down and just look at what's going on, and be able to make an educated guess. With the situation where it's skyline, that's the hardest scenario because there's no opportunity for feedback. Um, that's where you've got to take stop and take a couple of seconds and think it through. In this instance, we have to guess. We either went strong on wind or weak on wind, and you just have to be able to work through the process of, okay, what wind did I send, and where is that in relation to what the wind has been doing all day? Is that most likely high? Do I need to take some out? You can measure the target. You know, you can measure the target. Bring that. So okay, Morgan King does a really good job of working this through. He calls it his 80% rule. I think it's very smart. I do this a lot. Um, but say you get on and you're holding, say it's a 4/10 wide target and you're going to hold 6/10, and so you have from 4/10 to 8/10 covered, in the reticle for that target. You shoot, it doesn't hit anything. Well, now based on the information that you were given, nothing from 4/10 to 8/10 worked. So we have to send something different than that, essentially. So if we so we need to make bold adjustments, and this is why he calls it the 80% rule, and it is smart because our guns aren't lasers. It's not going to hit the exact same point every single time. There is a cone of accuracy, so there in theory, if your bullet could have hit on the left edge of your cone of accuracy, for that shot, and then if you make a too bold of an adjustment and then it ends up hitting on the right side of your cone of fire and then you miss. So that's why you don't make 100% swings. But say, 4 to 8/10 doesn't work. So, okay, so what is the reality? Is it the reality that the wind was stronger or the wind was weaker than is it stronger than 8/10 or weaker than 4/10? So let's say based on the information that we're given, we estimated that, well, it's probably lower than that. So I'm going to take, if you look at the inside edge of that target is the 4/10 wind hold. I'm going to move that to just inside the right edge of the target. And so now we're covering essentially from 1 to 5/10. And so that's why we don't want to take that 4/10 all the way to the edge of the target and cover from 0 to 4, because of the cone of fire and being able to account for that. So if we move it 80% of that target, we're going to cover from 1 to 5/10. And so there, in 2 shots, we've covered everything from 1 to 8/10 of wind. So you can start covering a lot of ground really quickly when you start manipulating the probability like that. So that's how I like to kind of analyze the pre-shot setup for PRS, NRL, and hunting, and then and then how I kind of walk through a miss for each of those scenarios. And then where I kind of like to tie all that into now is in this, and I'm not going to give you the answer. This is going to be totally up to you and the system and your capabilities. But now you can start applying that into like an ethical max range shot that you can take on an animal. So we've walked through, like how we're setting up for it and all that stuff, so we can take a look at, all right, so what is the wind doing? What kind of animal are we hunting? Is it a whitetail? Is it an elk? Because the vital zone size is going to be significantly different, and we know what we're working with. If we know what kind of animal and what kind of relative size that we're working with, we can kind of put a distance, a max distance, just purely based on the size of the target. Like, we're not going to shoot a 1 inch target at 2,000 yards. It's just going to be insane. So we can narrow it down off of that. Then we can start looking at the conditions. If it's a breezy, a cool, a beautiful day, no wind, I mean, you can make that choice. Or if you get out there and it's blowing 20 miles an hour and up and down, and you're in some canyons and shit, like, all right, I'm gonna have to get a lot closer. I'm gonna have to be 1 2 300 yards, something like that, to be able to account for all that stuff. um and then taking your cartridge, your setup, what your gun number is, what the wind is doing, so what your wind variance is going to allow for. And then based on your stability as a shooter and the system that you're working with, of what your wobble zone look like, and then you put all this together, and you've become the weapon. You have become part of the system, and you're going to have a lot more success, whether it be at the range, at a match, or in the field. So I hope that helps. That's kind of some start analyzing, where we can get better, and start filling in those gaps a little bit. But guys, thank y'all so much for listening. I am thoroughly enjoying the podcast. I love getting the feedback. I'm seeing I'm watching all the analytics. Thank you for following on Instagram. If you haven't seen, follow me on Instagram. My account is at the Mike Burdis. The show is Red, White, and Moose on Instagram, and then don't forget Phalanx Arms on Instagram as well. But the Phalanx, or the Red, White, and Moose page is new, but y'all are starting to find it, and it's starting to grow. But I'm working on some content and stuff for that. But guys, I love you. Thank you to Alpha, Lone Peak, Collis Foundation, Hawkins, West Texas Ordnance, Raven Rifles, and Botnia. You guys are awesome. To all of you guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you had an awesome Thanksgiving. I hope hunting season is treating you well, and I'll see you next week.